What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Roots. So I'm going to review the fifth album by rock band The Offspring. Basically, this project is called Americana, and it came out in the fall of 1998. So the thing about this particular album, I want to say that this album went diamond. I'd have to say something like that. It sold a whole bunch because of a particular number of singles, like one of which was Pretty Fly for a White Guy, another one was Why Don't You Get a Job, and the third one was The Kids Aren't All Right. But this actually had four singles. It was just a pretty multi-platinum smash. I'd have to suppose it's a bigger album out of the late 90s, early 2000s as far as that pitch kind of happened. This is the album by The Offspring I'm the most familiar with. I know that they had some other ones like Ixnay on the Ombre and some ones from like the early mid 90s as far as that pitch kind of happened. But I definitely remember the hits off this particular album, some of the first few singles as far as that kind of happened. This is an album that kind of continues to resonate. This one's pretty similar to like Green Day's Dookie, I'd have to say. In certain instances, especially when it comes to some of the singles, I feel like this album's pretty similar to Green Day's Dookie. Definitely a pretty staple of like, definitely a pretty big staple out of 90s rock radio. This is definitely a pretty revolutionary album. I would definitely have to suppose just paying attention to that prospect that this is an album that was a big deal. I mean, obviously because it went diamond, but just the fact that this album stuck around for a while and just did a lot of damage. This one's similar to Dookie, Kid Rock's Devil Without a Cause, some of those particular type records, Foo Fighters from 97 to 99, some of those particular type ones, No Doubt's Tragic Kingdom, some of those especially type ones. This is one that just had a lot of staying power throughout the second half of the 90s. This would definitely have to say, and it's just a pretty powerful album. It's just a pretty powerful album. I would definitely have to suppose. Did a lot of damage. Now the Offspring weren't there as much throughout the 2000s. I think they dropped like now the Offspring actually haven't been there that much after this particular album. They dropped like maybe one or two or three albums in the 2000s and only like one album in the 2010s and then one album since about 2015. I'd have to suppose they only really have about three or four more albums since this particular one. I'd have to suppose. So this album's like 26 years old. I'd have to say damn near. So that's kind of the concept about it. That's been quite a while. But I still would have to say this is a pretty pitch album. This just had a lot of particular highlights on here. And like I was saying, this was a staple of the 90s. Did a lot of things right. It was just kind of boisterous and just had songs that were all over the radio and just had a lot of lastability. These songs lasted into 1999, 2000s. These songs lasted into 1999, 2000, the early 2000s. Just pitches like that. This is basically something that just continues to resonate. This real kind of laid back kind of fare, especially songs that if you like songs like When I Come Around and Longview by Green Day, this has some similar pitches to that. I would definitely say like songs like Why Don't You Get a Job and The Kids Aren't All Right have some similar kind of lazy summer type vibes about it. This is definitely a great summer album to kind of listen to in the lazy kind of summer heat of June, July, August, especially some of those particular type times, a little bit of September, going back to class and work and some of those type times as far as that particularly kind of happens. And just kind of the aspects of just kind of getting towards that, I'd have to suppose. So some good pitches to kind of have. I would have to say there were four singles off this particular album. The first one was Pretty Fly for a White Guy. I'd have to say this is like a breezy kind of summer jive of a song. I would definitely feel like it's a smokingly good kind of bar hopping music. Definitely, I feel like this is some rave kind of frat and house party type fun. I would definitely This is definitely some rave kind of frat and house party type fun. I would definitely feel like, and this song just boils overall. So the thing about this particular album that was interesting about the Offspring is they have a lot of pretty crazed and overall jivey type songs. They definitely have some exhilarating type energy. That's one thing I noticed about them compared to some other bands, that they really have like the octanes. They really have the octanes when it comes to energy pretty turned up. They definitely get pretty rave and just overall carnivorous, I would have to say. Even if they're not like, even if the riffage is not full blown, I feel like just the work that they do kind of in a punk sense, they're definitely more turned up than Blink 182. They're definitely more turned up than Green Day and some of those type ones that are a little bit more commercial. I feel like if you're looking for punk type music like Green Day, Blink 182, some of those type ones, Good Charlotte, but you want with like a more frenetic and kind of carnivorous kind of pace, this would be the band to go with. This just has a lot of summer hits on here and a lot of good energy. Pretty Fly for a White Guy is a great kind of bar hopping tune. I just would have to say, if you're really trying to get pounded for the day and just really get cranked, something like that, this is a great song to kind of have. And there are some other ones on here, I would have to say, but the rest of the singles don't have the same kind of energy as Pretty Fly for a White Guy. But I would definitely have to say I would have to say that the remaining three singles are some great kind of summer malaise type tunes that are just great for some summer makeshift, I would definitely feel like. So these are just kind of lazier ones. But Why Don't You Get a Job is the second single. This is kind of a lazy, relaxed, and comfy kind of blue collar day malaise. I would have to say this has some commercial appeal and it's just an overall 90s staple. So I definitely feel like some of these songs did hit number one on the rock charts. I would check, but I just kind of some of these songs did hit number one on like the rock charts. I'd have to say these were definitely some good pitches. I know that Pretty Fly for a White Guy was a big deal, and a lot of these songs have over 300 million plays on Spotify. So the first three singles that you hear, Pretty Fly, Why Don't You Get a Job, and The Kids Aren't All Right, all have over The first three singles that you hear, Pretty Fly for a White Guy, Why Don't You Get a Job, and The Kids Aren't Alright, all have over 300 million plays on Spotify. So these are all pretty vastly popular. I'd have to say these are definitely some good pitches, but Why Don't You Get a Job is just a very lazy, kind of relaxed type tone, very similar to the Green Day When I Come Around in Longview type vibes, just something like that. Just a real kind of lazy, kind of summer, just mellow skies, this kind of summer June lambent type tune as far as I kind of have. It's just a real nice one to kind of have and just relaxation, I'd have to suppose. If I said the second, third, and fourth single are all kind of more lazy, relaxed type ones, I guess that's not entirely true. I forgot that The Kids Aren't Alright is a more exhilarating type one, but a couple of these, like Why Don't You Get a Job and She's Got Issues, are kind of more lazier type, summer malaise type ones. But The Kids Aren't Alright is a more bustling type tune. This is a more riveting. This one's a more riveting and bustling makeshift type song, I would have to say. And this is definitely a song for like the errands need to be done, I would definitely feel like. And this is just good for some summer frolic. So this is definitely one I would kind of see the pitch of just like just being out in the wind, kind of in traverse, that sort of stuff, just mid commute, something like that. Errands need to be done. Those last bit of tasks need to be taken care of, some of that sort of pitch. Just kind of the bustle of just getting it done in like the summer heat. It's a summer frolicking type song. Doesn't have to be all work, but it's also not all doesn't have to be all work, but it also doesn't feel all recreation, I would have to suppose. So it's kind of an in-between type song just to get stuff done and kind of be in the romp of just the summer heat as far as that mixture kind of goes. Very hooky. These songs are all very hooky. These are all smash hit songs. The first three singles that you hear, Kids Aren't Alright, Why Don't You Get a Job, Pretty Fly for a White Guy, all these did pretty good. Like I was saying with the Spotify plays, all three of those being over 300 million plays. So these are all some pretty big staples that you probably heard in rock radio. If you haven't heard, if you don't wholesomely know about this project, I'd have to say just, they're frequented throughout rock radio and standard times, I'd have to say. They're frequent in rock radio throughout standard times, I'd have to say, despite the fact that this is a 25-year-old album, still pretty popular, I'd have to say. She's Got Issues is the fourth single. This is the least performing one in terms of the popularity, but still a pretty good highlight. I would definitely have to say this is a pretty nice one. This is kind of a late single that works pretty heavy. This one's just kind of a late single that works pretty heavily still, I'd have to suppose. This one's a lazy kind of summer shining fun, I would have to say. It's similar to Longview by Green Day. I would definitely feel like it's just a hop and bop kind of rock heater, I would definitely feel like. So this is so the pitch behind She's Got Issues is this is just a real kind of summer boiler. I'd have to say just a lazy kind of summer evening, summer day, something like that. Just kind of the pitch of just like some standard makeshift. Very similar to Why Don't You Get a Job, just within that kind of lazy malaise type pitch as far as I would kind of particularly kind of goes. These are just some nice ones, rock radio staples, commercial appeal that they just kind of have. They're very hooky, stuff like that. Just kind of the overall pitch of just getting some of those, I'd have to say. So that's kind of the thing. That's basically the singles about this album, I'd have to say. Like I said, this is a diamond selling album, so a lot of these are all over the place. These are all interchangeable type songs. I mean, I don't know. Compared to the Green Day album, I don't know how many of these kind of had like other songs that were kind of released as radio singles and stuff like that, but I think at least 4 interchangeable type songs is pretty good considering that this album really only has 12 songs. Now it has 14 on there, but one is just the Pretty Fly for a White Guy reprise, so that's the 14th song, and then Pay the Man is like an 8-minute song, and then Pay the Man is like an 8-minute song, and then Welcome is just like a minute intro or something like that, or like a 15-second intro, something like that. So out of those 12 songs that are on the album, I'm going to go ahead and recommend 8. That's the concept behind it. So basically the 8 songs I recommend would be Pretty Fly for a White Guy, Why Don't You Get a Job, The Kids Aren't Alright, She's Got Issues, No Breaks, Staring at the Sun, The End of the Line, and Americana, the title track. So to talk about some of these, basically there's some pretty pasted ones on here. I'd have to say No Breaks is a definite good example of that. This is kind of like a pasted kind of mosh craze and exhilarating kind of summer house party smash of a song. I'd have to say it's just a great song to get cranked to. So some of these, these songs are definitely some snappy kind of overall craze type ones that just work pretty heavily. This one's pretty much on the same pitch as Pretty Fly for a White Guy. No Breaks is basically on the same pitch as Pretty Fly for a White Guy, I'd have to say, and so is Staring at the Sun and The End of the Line. These are all some exhilarating type ones, but No Breaks really has some carnivorous type times to really be had. Definitely some bar hopping songs. Staring at the Sun is another one. This is like a summer kind of hot day out and about type song, and it morphs into like a craze kind of hyper times of a song. And this song morphs into like a craze kind of hyper times of a song I would definitely have to feel like, and it's just some very nice stuff. So I definitely like the appeal of this particular one. These are just off the meter in terms of craze kind of energy. This is definitely some mosh pit type craze and just overall kind of exhilarating type times. So this has a lot of pace in this and just really kind of gets things quite carnivorous. I would have to say these are just some nice ones. A lot of these are just great frat music and house party type music, I'd have to suppose. These are just some great kind of overall ones to kind of having like a good sociable kind of sense and like a more residential type sense, I'd have to suppose. So these are some nice ones. And then the end of the line, and then the end of the line is another highlight. This is basically like a pacey kind of out and about Traverse craze of a song. I'd have to say it's an on the go type song, but it's energized about how it does it. And it's just a great social drive that this one particularly kind of has. This one just reminds me of like some hit type craze, just being in a car, just really cruising, some stuff like that, just really kind of being out and about in like a real kind of, this song just gives off energy in a real rave type sense. So these are definitely, like I was saying, a lot of these songs are just pretty carnivorous just overall, but this is definitely one for being on the go and stuff like that, just a kind of more, so a lot of these songs are pretty crazy and carnivorous, but this is definitely one, the end of the line is definitely one that's just kind of more on the go in terms of its craziness and just kind of being out and about with just some bustle to kind of get you excited about driving and just being out and about as far as that pitch kind of happens. This is definitely a good Traverse type one to kind of have overall, I'd have to say. Then Americana, the title track's another highlight. This is definitely a good night venue rumbler. I'd have to say this is an energized and decent dance hit. I would have to say this is an energized and decent dance hit. I would definitely have to feel like, and this is just gets you out. This song gets you out your seat definitely. And it's just an overall social hit. So these are just some good boppage type ones. I really like the night appeal. There's not a ton of nightclub songs in this particular album. I feel like Pretty Fly for a White Guy's like a bar hopping type song, but for the most part, the outing songs are not in abundance. I feel like most of this is just kind of, I feel like most of this album is less about the outing sense and more about some residential type fares, just frat music and house party type music, just more residential kind of round the neighborhood type appeals and just overall, just round the neighborhood type appeals and just overall more kind of residential type, just festivities as far as that kind of aspect kind of happens. This is definitely a popular album, I'd have to say, but it's just not quite as outing as much. I mean, apart from Pretty Fly for a White Guy and Americana, the title track, those are about the only two real ones I kind of felt like. I mean, maybe you can find some bar hopping songs in here a little bit, but for the most part, it's less nightclub, less dance club, less kind of social kind of raveness of just like city stepping and stuff like that, and more just kind of bustle of just car traverse and just more residential, just kind of picking up beers and things like that, and just kind of hard liquors, some stuff like that, just kind of more, just more, not necessarily insular, but it's kind of more, yeah, just to keep saying more residential type house party type affairs, I'd have to say. It was a good concept. So to talk about some of the songs I don't recommend on here, which is just for basically some of these, like Have You Ever, talk about some of these ones I didn't recommend on here. One in particular was Have You Ever. Just didn't really like the arrangements of this particular one and the composition behind it. This was not that melodic and easy to kind of, it was just not that melodic and compelling to listen to as far as that arrangement kind of happened. Just didn't really appreciate the hook on there as much. It was kind of similar to some of these other ones. Just didn't do as good a job as some of the more hit singles and better hit songs on this particular project. So I didn't really enjoy Have You Ever that much. Walla Walla was just kind of a poor one. That was just kind of an awkward type song, trying to have like some exhilarating type energy. It was definitely kind of carnivorous. It was definitely kind of a carnivorous type song, but I just didn't really appreciate like the affability behind that one. It was just not quite as interesting of one. And then I also felt like Feelings was a poor one. This is another kind of exhilarating type one. It's too bad because normally I like cover songs by rock bands, but this one just didn't really do a good job of nailing that particular one. I mean, some of these are pretty festive and like their energy. It's just the fact the band work and the production work, the instrumentation's definitely pretty good, but I just didn't appreciate these ones as much. Just didn't really have as much affability. I feel like Feelings just was not, I mean, it had the energy towards it, but it just was not too good a cover as far as that particular type song kind of went. It's just kind of, maybe it could have used a different cover or something like that, but it just didn't really see the affability behind that one. And then Pay the Man, I'm just usually not a fan of like 8-minute songs or 7-minute songs, or most songs past like 6.5 minutes, I'd have to say. So I didn't really appreciate that one as much. I don't normally vibe with songs of that length, I'd have to say. So that's kind of the concept about it. But yeah, to talk about this, so to talk about the score, I'm going to give this particular album, me recommending 8 songs out of 12 on this album. I'm going to go ahead and give this album like an 8.25 out of 10. I feel like that's a pretty good score to kind of get with it as far as that particularly kind of happens. It's definitely a smash hit type album, but I just kind of feel like there's some spare songs on here in particular that just don't work as much. I kind of feel like they have some album cuts on here. The singles are definitely strong. All 4 of the singles hit pretty heavily. These are all really affable and chart heavy, I would definitely have to suppose. They definitely have some exhilarating type energy. It's real kind of cranked up, kind of great album to get cranked to and things like that. Get drunk, get bent to, that sort of stuff. Some bar hopping music, some residential house party and frat type music just within that sense. But I'd have to say, it is kind of, I mean, some of these ones have some energy on here, like Walla Walla and Feelings have some energy, but they're just a little bit too energetic in a sense. I would have to suppose they just don't really have enough freneticness and just overall song composition to really make those more of highlights. I just feel like it's just kind of some minor type complaints, just a few, just maybe like couple album cuts shy of like being a full-blown classic, I'd have to suppose. It's definitely a diamond selling album. The singles definitely work, but it's just kind of the concept that just had a few snags about it. More than just like a few minor compositions, as far as getting some album cuts that just have like the sheer impact of like some of the ones that do have some energy. I mean, it's just kind of just a few minor snags in terms of the songwriting for some of those album cuts, I'd have to say. But the social score, as a result, I'm gonna give the social score. I'm gonna give the social score of this album like a 9 out of 10 because 4 hit singles plus the fact that it does have some affable times. This is definitely a pretty crazy album. This is a great album to get energized with your buzz and stuff like that. It's got some songs for the ladies, got some frat party type songs, some good makeshift, some stuff like that, just some bar hopping, some good recreation, exhilaration type vibes, and even some traverse type vibes to kind of have for some of this particular pitch. So it just has some overall affable type times. This is kind of the concept. It's just like I said, it's just a song or two shy of being like a classic in terms of not just regular impact, but social impact. I just would have to say, but it's still, I mean, a 9 out of 10 is nothing to sneeze at. I have to say, so it's a good concept there. So it's a good concept there, and I'd have to say, in terms of the future, I'm not really sure what the Offspring has been up to. I know that the Offspring dropped an album somewhere in the past 5 years or so, so there's that to kind of know about. But I just would have to say they have some other hit albums. I'm definitely going to get to some of these, like the Ixnay on the Ombre album, something like that. I'd have to suppose, but this is definitely a pretty highlighted album. I would definitely have to suppose. Definitely some social rave kind of times, especially for some house party type fairs and frat type affairs. Definitely for some good house party type fairs and frat party type fairs. I'd have to say it's a good 90s pick to kind of have. It's a classic 90s album in the sense of like this impact that it had. This is a classic 90s album in terms of impact, and even though I don't view it as a classic, I do feel like this is a pretty revolutionary album that did a lot of damage. So definitely recommend it.